So it's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Tom Baker. Now, Tom doesn't need much of an introduction in this church since everybody knows Tom very well. I first met you, Tom, back in the early 90s, and I heard this Catholic priest was coming down here in summers and studying education. I says, I got to get to meet that guy. And you were living with Francis Sporer, and we met each other, and you started coming to this church and kind of warmed up to this church and enjoyed it. And next thing we know, Tom had quit the Catholic Church and became an ordained minister with the Fellowship of the Inner Light. He went from the largest church in the world to the smallest church in the world. And an interesting thing about all that I didn't know, that in Catholic theology and the Catholic Church, if you're a priest and you leave the priesthood, you still can do ceremonies and so forth. But if you become ordained in another church, you can't even do that anymore. So Tom really kind of burnt the bridge there with the Catholic Church and made a clean cut. And he began his life as a psychotherapist. In addition to being minister here, he got his master's in social work. And as the years went by, Tom and I became a psychotherapist eventually as well. And we have such a karmic relationship that I have an office that I was working with First Colonial Psychotherapy. I'd been there a number of years, and Tom was looking for an office, so he and Kathy he joined our practice, and Tom's sharing my office with me. You know, that's called karma, right? And we were, yeah, good karma. And so Tom and I go way back. The thing that impresses me most about Tom is he completely gives himself to serving others. I mean, this man works his psychotherapy practice, which is really challenging, you know, seeing 8, 10, sometimes up to, one time he told me and Marty he saw 15 cases that day. And these are, you know, very intense. And you don't come see a psychotherapist because you're happy, you know. And so he'd do all that. Then on top of that, he would, on every Sunday afternoon for decades now, Tom leads the Course in Miracles, and he's doing it here now at this church every Sunday. I think it's 4:30 every Sunday afternoon. But he's been dedicated to doing that. And on top of that, he preaches in all these churches, which requires all day Saturday to kind of put together a talk. He writes out every word he's going to say. So, I mean, it's amazing to me how you do all this, Tom. But he never quits. He just keeps going. So with all that, Tom, come on up. All right. Great. Thank you.
Well, let me see. That's what I worked on. All right. Well, I am going to risk something today, and I'm going to repeat myself. Not the whole talk. Most of the talk is new. But I'm going to tell you about something that I've told you about before. It's about a mystical experience I had when I was 28 years old. I was staying at the Monastery for the Holy Spirit in Conyers, Georgia, which is a Trappist monastery. And in Trappist monasteries, you don't talk. You sing and chant and pray, but you don't talk. Now, I'm a rather gregarious, talkative person. So this was kind of hard for me to do. I was quitting smoking at the same time. So this was especially tough right in the beginning. But I lasted, and I was silent for 2 months. And one morning, after being silent for all that time, I was walking down a path in the early morning, and all of a sudden, something happened. What happened was everything filled with light. Everything I saw was lit up from the inside. The barn, the fence, the barbed wire fence, the sidewalk, my hands, a bird that was perched on the fence, a bull in the fenced-in area, all filled with light. And I was amazed, but that was not all. Not only was everything filled with light, but everything was happy. Happy. The barn was happy. The fence, even that barbed wire fence, you think of a fence with barbed wire as sort of a mean little thing. It wasn't mean at all. It was happy. And the little bird, the bull, everything was happy. Even my hands were happy. It never occurred to me that I was surrounded by absolute joy. Now, this is the case here. You're sitting on a happy chair. The Christmas tree is happy. That little, whoever that is up there on the piano, is that good, King Wenceslas? Oh, okay. Gunk. Everything's happy. We're happy. And I looked up to the sky where I thought God was. God is in your heart, like the 2-year-old knows. But I looked up to the sky and I realized that God was happy. I mean, really happy, like boom, 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 happy. And then I said to myself, or I rather said to God, speaking to myself, well, you wouldn't be so happy if you walked around in my shoes for a few months. Yes. Well, you know what happened? Yep, that's what happened, Ellen. Everything went down. The light went away, the happiness was gone, the barn was a barn, the bull was a bull, the bird was a bird, the fence was a fence. And there I was with my own unhappiness. So, this changed my life in a lot of ways. You know how God, we often think of, is not very happy. He's sort of serious and grim and watching us. When I was a priest, I had a youth group, and their favorite song was, "I'm always watching you." Every step you take, every smile you fake, I'll be watching you. It's about a stalker. God was stalking them. I said, no, that's ridiculous. Yeah, but we like the song, Father, so okay. Now, it goes with Jesus. Jesus had a happy birth. It was a third world birth, but it was happy. Happy shepherds, happy animals, probably happy children. Everything bathed in starlight. Joseph strong and awkward and happy. Mary exhausted and pleased. The baby Jesus in a stone manger. You know, in that part of the world, there's very little wood. They cut all the trees down to build Solomon's temple. So Jesus was not just a carpenter, he was a stonemason. That's a big person's job. So Jesus was a pretty big guy. But anyway, Jesus was happy. The manger was happy. He was swaddled tight against the damp night, rumors of wise men on their way to visit. Jesus was welcomed with excitement and loved as the one who was expected for hundreds of years. Born to the sound of angelic singing. Now, this is how we remember his birth, the birth of the Savior, the birth of love itself into the world. A world gripped by fear and torn apart by hate. A lot like the world today. Now, we're all searching for love, not just in the baby Jesus, but with each other. Marilyn put her hand on her boyfriend and smiled, and now her head fell on his shoulder. That's love. Yes, indeed. And when we find love, we think we'll finally be happy. When I was in college, I thought that getting married would finally give me love and make me happy. My strategy was that I would carry around poems I wrote about love and marriage, waiting for a woman to walk up to me and ask what was in my folder. Finally, I figured out that no woman except my mother would be very interested in what was in my tattered folder. Exactly. So I just asked girls out on dates and read my poems at dinner. It was a disaster. One girl told me that this was too much like school. This wasn't a date, it was English class. I went through college pretty much alone for the first 2 years. Then I found out that kissing and hugging worked much better than poetry. So love can be confusing. Kissing and hugging and sex in general was more exciting than poetry, but the relationships never went anywhere. We had endless discussions about our relationships. Do you love me now? Did you love me yesterday? Will you love me tomorrow? Do you really love me? What is love anyway? Do you love me like Brad loved me? Do you love me like my dad loved me, like my mom loved me? Do you love me? Well, I began to doubt whether marriage was for me or not. But I kept writing poems, and I kept writing them now about God. And I ended up in the seminary, ended up in the priesthood, where love was universal, but very distant, very impersonal. More confusion about love. Love was always just beyond reach. Now, love can be disappointing. Women especially take responsibility for a loving relationship. You say, my love wasn't enough, so he left me, or he hurt me, or he just shut down. Love can be a sad story. So love here on earth is not only a bit scarce, but often twisted into ideas of sacrifice or made into a deal. The deal is often that the person I love be more like me than like themselves. Think about that. I like to say that a happy marriage comes about because I forgive my wife for not being me. Now, when Jesus loved people, he didn't say how much it hurt, or what a sacrifice he was making, or how attracted he was to the person's body. He looked into the eyes of people and saw their souls, asking for the only thing that ever makes us happy, to be valued for who we are, celebrated for the love each of us is, created in the image of love itself. You are sitting among the image of God. Tall and short, fat and thin, young and old. The image of love itself. Now, when I met Kathy, I fell in love with her without even reading a poem. She loved me as I was. And I told her one day, I said, Kathy, all I want to do is make you happy. Now you'd think that would be a harmless kind of statement. But Kathy stood up and she said, Tom, I'm already happy. Now what are you going to do? Well, I didn't know what to say. Here I was. I'm a fixer, you know. I go around making people happy. They pay me, but I make them happy. But she didn't need my happiness. She said, "Don't fix me, Tom. I'm not broken. Accept me for my happiness, and everything will be all right." 31 years later, it's been all right. It's worked. We forget that Jesus was happy. He partied, ate with sinners, drank with tax collectors, traded jokes with prostitutes. John the Baptist was puzzled by the celebrating Jesus and asked if he were the one expected or should we look for someone else. God was supposed to be solemn, authoritarian, judgmental, sometimes murderous, definitely not happy. Yet here was Jesus having a ball with the human race, healing, eating, drinking, accepting everybody, loving without critique, no questions asked. Edgar Casey said that on the way to the cross, Jesus told jokes. I bet they were Pharisee jokes. How many Pharisees does it take to ride a chariot, you know? None. They don't know what a chariot is or something. You know, like Pollock jokes. Well, I told that to a group of nuns one time, and half of them left. Jesus was sad and grim, sacrificing, and like all humans when they sacrifice, a bit resentful, like them. For too long, the cross of Jesus has been a sign of guilt rather than forgiveness. The Jesus whose birth we celebrate tomorrow was a happy man. When he shared his joy with the sick, they got well. When he smiled at tax collectors, they became his followers. When he touched lepers, their disfigurement disappeared and they returned to their villages. Wherever Jesus went, there was delighted expectation and dancing in the streets. Now, the world is not happy these days. We're trying to find what's right in the world by focusing on what's wrong with each other. Now that isn't working. Many of you have stopped watching the news because it's so disturbing. People hating each other, killing each other, committing atrocities that are unspeakable. Now more than ever, we need Christmas. We need the loving Jesus. More than that, we need the happy Jesus. So often, as I said, the portrait of Christ is that of a sad and dying man being tortured to death. Yet that was not Jesus at all. He brought people joy, was engaging with everybody, and left behind him sweet memories of healing and celebration. He loved the world and each one of us. And yet we have abandoned love again in Ukraine, in Israel, our politics, and with each other. Every person for themselves, and how much will it cost? This Christmas, don't stand for it. Share your happiness with one another. Insist on joy, for joy is the signature of love. Joy is the meaning of Christmas. Thank you.